All right. You heard the woman. This call is now being recorded. Thank you, Miss Google. Let's get started.
All right, so today is the second review session for AP Government that we are going to be doing a couple things. It's not going to be as long as the first one, just in case anybody didn't hear that first part. But we are going to go over some important stuff. In particular, we are going to be going over the FRQ for the argumentative essay. Hey, Bana, can you go to the next one? So that's the rest of the schedule. I know we had to move some stuff around for today. We just got a bunch of like random meetings that popped up today. So we had to move it back a little bit. But those are the ones that are scheduled. Again, this one is the second one. So we're going to be dissecting question 1, which is the argumentative essay. And then we have Friday, May 1st, Thursday, May 7th, and Sunday, May 10th. Sunday, May 10th is going to be the right before the exam that you guys will be taking online on May 11th. So that one's probably a really good one. We'll be on for a while on that one. So make sure you're there or have some plans on for that one. Next slide, Bhagat. So if you didn't see it already, there was a video that popped out yesterday from a lot of the teachers at Valley. It's a really funny video that Bagnat produced and made. So you guys should absolutely click on it and play it. Oh, and also, if you want to follow along with the PowerPoint on your own, you can click the PowerPoint that we posted on Google Classroom before. It is the same slides. So every time that we update these slides, it'll be the same link, though. So I'll just post it again just in case. But yeah, you have the option to look at that video. It's really funny. It's almost an hour long. That's how many teachers love you guys. So we just wanted to make a huge video for you guys. So take a peek. It's real funny. You might see a couple teachers you know. All right, Barnum, next slide. Yes, cringe is funny as well for teachers. So it's important for the argumentative essay because, again, as you can see on this chart here, it is going to be worth 60%. Again, this is all new from the new AP updates that they handed down last week. So it's going to be 60%. So this question is the more important question of the two that you will be getting. You're going to get 25 minutes to complete it, and then you're going to go into it. So probably the most confusing thing about this particular one is the setup of it. Like it's very confusing on how it's actually going to be set up. But once we go over the one that I have as an example for you guys today, it'll kind of make it a little bit more clear and a little bit easier for you guys to understand how the question's going to be. So we'll go over all the question description stuff in a couple slides. Next slide. So this is the overall format. So some type of scenario will be given. It'll be a real life example scenario. So it won't be some really like made up thing. It's something that can actually happen in government. And your job is to kind of either defend it or go against it as to whether that is a good decision or a bad decision based on what your knowledge is from AP government. So in the end, you are going to be having to use 2 pieces of evidence from 2 different sources. Now, the weird wording of this one that I always like to point out when we talk about this little bit of an argumentative essay here is that you can use the same like document. Like, so for instance, if your first piece of evidence is from the we'll say like the U.S. Constitution, you can pick another piece of evidence from the U.S. Constitution to use in your essay. You don't have to pick a completely separate document to write your second piece of evidence. So that was always some big confusing question last year as to do I have to pick a different document or do I have to can I use the same document? You can actually use the same document, just a different piece of evidence is the key, okay? Then the first thing that you guys are going to be doing today is you're going to be writing a thesis statement about that scenario. So you are going to, I think we kind of practiced a little bit of thesis writing with the last question that we kind of practiced yesterday, or last time we recorded and we were on Google Hangout, Google Meet actually. And so that looked like you guys did pretty well with that. So we'll practice again, but using the argumentative essay thesis writing. And then you're going to support that thesis with 2 pieces of accurate and relevant evidence, 1 piece from a list of documents that they will give you. Usually they give you about, I think last year there was 3 on the actual AP exam, but there are some questions that only give you 2. It depends on the question and the scenario overall. And then you're going to have to basically explain or elaborate why your piece of evidence supports your thesis. So we'll go over onto those things in the next couple slides as well. Next one.
Yeah. So another piece of advice too is you have these packets already. All the packets we gave you at the beginning of the year, the ones with the cover pages, like Federal's 10, 51, 70, 78, 10th Amendment, letter from Birmingham jail, all those packets are what are known as the foundational documents as a reminder. And so when they ask you to use a piece of evidence from those documents, it would be probably handy to have those packets in front of you when you're about to take the test. All right. As I promised, I will post those packets in a digital format on Google Classroom soon. I did get word from some of my APGOV pals across CCSD, and they said I can't post the answer key. I cannot post the answer key on Google Classroom. So you're going to have to work with each other. If, for example, you're like Jasmine Funches, who left all of her stuff in her locker, you're going to have to work with each other to get those answers. And always, we're here for you if you have any specific questions on those documents. But again, make sure you locate those documents because you will need them. So locate those packets if you already have them, put them to the side because they're going to be nice to have. Some documents you can toss are probably, well, actually, no, all of them are pretty relevant. But letter from Birmingham jail, I'm pretty sure that it probably won't be that. Watch me be wrong, but it'll probably not be that. But we'll give you some guiding support when we talk about Unit 3 in these upcoming sessions. So.
Yeah, and the important thing here that I don't know if they did this last year, but you might remember if they did or not. But they've actually like completely opened it up now to anything that you've learned as a piece of evidence from our classes. So it doesn't have to be a foundation. The only one of them really has to be a foundational document. The other one can literally be anything as a piece of evidence.
So you can use 2 foundational documents. The minimum requirement that you need is 1 foundational document. And then if you want to use another piece of evidence from that same document, then you've met the requirement. However, you can use just 1 foundational document, and then you can use knowledge you've also learned in class to cite from, and then you'll have to elaborate on why you've included that as evidence. Yeah. So 1 piece of evidence has to come directly from a foundational document, otherwise you'll lose a point. All right. Yeah. You might have 2 brilliant points, but one of them has to be from a foundational document.
And I'm not going to lie about the example that we have today. Like one of the documents that they say you can, like there's 2 documents you can choose from. The first one, like I think probably like 99% of your answers will probably come from that particular document. And then the second document on there probably is a little bit more complicated how you would connect to the scenario. So again, in my mind, I would think just pick one of the foundational documents that they choose, use that, and then try to find some other piece of evidence, either using, like, I would probably use the Constitution as a way to kind of answer all those exact questions. But
so some of these documents too go hand in hand with APUSH. So I think the second document is referring to as the Declaration, which you cover more in APUSH than in APGOV. But again, if you remember that content, then use that to your advantage. Mm-hmm. So.
All right, go ahead and go to the next slide on there. The rubric. All right, so the rubric, again, they simplified this. It was a lot more confusing previously. There was a lot more other things that you kind of had to basically check off as you wrote your essay. But they've simplified it to being this kind of like very simple, like 7-point scale, basically, as you can see on the PowerPoint. The most important thing is the pieces of evidence. As long as they are relevant pieces of evidence and you support those pieces of evidence towards your thesis, that's where a lot of the points are coming from. Also, an important thing to kind of make sure you guys do, we can't say it enough, is basically you have to write a thesis statement. If you don't write the thesis, I think we said it last meeting as well. If you don't write the thesis,
we'll say it again. Thesis, important.
It's the easiest point you can possibly get, but it's also the most important point. So make sure that you are one of the first sentences you start writing with should be your thesis. in your mini essay here. And then as you go down, you can start using your pieces of evidence, and then you can explain and elaborate to get a couple of those last 2 points on there. Go ahead, go to the next slide on there. Or if you have something
to add on to that. So again, like Billington said, you can earn 1 point just for having a thesis statement. All right, thesis statement, 1 sentence. Boom, 1 point. And then you have 0 to 4 points by using 2 pieces of specific and relevant evidence to support the thesis or your claim. So there's 4 points. So it's 1 point for the first piece of evidence, and then 1 point for. Or I'm sorry. Let me backtrack. So you get 1 point for citing a document and explaining what that document's about, and then you get another point for explaining the relevance. Okay, and then you get the same amount of points too for the second piece of evidence. And then for the last point, when you elaborate why the 2 pieces of evidence support the claim or thesis, you're just explaining why you chose those 2 to help support your argument. Does that make sense, y'all? Let's do a quick check. Everyone in chat, does that make sense? So again, 1 point for thesis. You have 2 points for citing a specific foundational document. One of those points is and talking a little bit about it. One of it is providing the relevance, and you have to do it for 2 pieces of evidence. And then the last point is elaborating on why it helps support your claim or thesis that you've made. So, chat, does that make sense?
Everybody should hit yes or no. Or sort of. Oh, and also, guys, if you are we're just going through stuff and you have a question, and even if it's not like a huge question, just write it down in the chat. We'll come back at the end of either the meet or sometime relatively soon, just in case you have any questions about anything. Just pop it in on there, and we'll get to answering all the questions on there.
So I think I'll take this slide since I included it. So if you're a visual learner, here you go. Right, this is your essay. Okay, so at the very top you see topic of prompt. So what's the topic about? You're essentially restating the topic. And then you have your thesis, okay? You have your thesis. There we go. That's your first paragraph. Again, a paragraph you've learned in class that it's typically 4 to 5 sentences. Your first paragraph in this case can be 2 sentences. And we want it to be as short as possible because you only have, how much time? You only have 25 minutes to write your essay. So again, no fluff at all. Just get straight to the point. So restate the topic and then state your side of the argument, which is going to be your thesis. Then you have evidence 1, okay? Then you have evidence 2. So you have to have 2 pieces of evidence. One piece of evidence has to be a foundational document in the blue. The other piece of evidence can be from that same foundational document or anything you've learned in class. And then you explain the reasoning, okay? Explain the reasoning behind claim 1, explain the reasoning behind evidence 2, and you'll be good to go. And we're going to provide you some sort of, a visual, maybe a blank worksheet for you to potentially write your essay on, potentially write practice essays on, so you can get in the habit of following that format. So,
yeah, we're gonna, over the next couple of meets, we'll definitely have we'll time it and everything so that you guys get used to kind of seeing the question and then being able to either type it or answering it in the time allotted. So it's as close to actually taking the AP exam as we can possibly make it. All right, so this is actually one of the last slides, but basically this is how it's going to pop up on the exam. As you can see, the very top part gives the scenario, and then at the very bottom, you can see the 2 documents that it gives you to kind of choose from as pieces of evidence. So I'll read through it with you guys. That way you guys kind of can see it. And then we're going to kind of break it down into the different parts that you're going to need to answer it in. So it says, in an effort to balance free speech rights with the needs to create a safe learning environment for a diverse group of students, some public universities have established free speech zones on their campuses. Within the zones, students are permitted to protest, post signs, and engage freely in the expression of their opinions. Outside the zones, however, students are expected to avoid speech that could be seen as offensive or obscene. Many have criticized these zones for limiting free speech and have called into question the constitutionality of designated zones for free speech. So your goal is to develop an argument either for or against the use of free speech zones on public college campuses. You have to use at least 1 piece of evidence from the following foundational documents. you can choose either the First Amendment or the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so that is your scenario question. So what I want you guys to do on chat now is I want you to, hey Barna, can you go back real quick to the thing that you posted, the picture, the setup? So first things first, I want you to write out what topic is this prompt about. So think about the different topics we've talked about as far as all of the stuff that we've learned thus far. What topic do you think this scenario is talking about? So you guys can post it in chat. We'll give you a couple minutes to do that. Doesn't have to be a complete sentence, though. Just recognizing the topic, though, is the key. Okay, so we got one answer, which is good. Two.
So far we have freedom of speech. Okay. You have freedom of speech. You have validity of free speech zones. Okay. So it's asking for the topic of the prompt. So if it can be as specific as possible, I kind of like out of those 3 responses we have so far, Paula's response, the validity of free speech zones. So we talked about freedom of speech, but how does it tie in with the prompt? We're going to try and tie it into the prompt as specific as you can possibly get. So I think for the topic of prompt, freedom, validity of free speech zones. So just going off a tangent, UNLV actually has a free speech zone as well, and it's essentially a designated area for you to speak your mind and for you to advertise whatever you want to advertise. And obviously, there's a time, place, and manner. Or did I just give you the answer for one of the sections? Time, place, and manner for
stop talking. Just stop talking.
For saying, yeah. Let's just stop there.
Yeah.
But on topic of prompt, I like those responses again. Short, sweet, to the point. Okay.
Yeah.
And then now we're going to spend a couple of minutes here developing your thesis. Okay. So, Billy's, go ahead. I'm sorry for taking the spotlight.
Yeah. So we'll give you guys about, because I really want to, because obviously the thesis is important and we really want to make sure that it's good. We're going to, and based on the time period that you normally would get, we're going to give you like 5 minutes, we'll say, to kind of write your thesis. Because ideally it should only take you about 5 minutes to write your thesis, because you really want to be able to focus on the pieces of evidence as well. But so go ahead, now that you kind of know what the topic of this scenario is about, and you kind of see maybe where it's leading to with the 2 foundational documents that it's given you, I want you to write as close to as what your thesis statement might be if this were to pop up on the actual AP exam. So do the best you could possibly think of, and go ahead and type that into the chat. So we'll give you 5 minutes. I'll get the timer going.
Yeah, so now's your time to fail. So pretend this is your AP exam, right? So where you're at right now is probably the same place you'll be when you take the AP exam. So pretend that this is the exam. Here's the scenario, right? Here's what it's asking you to do, right? Develop an argument either for or against the use of free speech zones. So what's your thesis going to be? All right. So hopefully you remember some advice we gave you last review session. I'm not going to repeat them. I want to see if you've retained that information. Please type in a thesis statement, 1 sentence, and we'll look at each and every single one of them and critique them or compliment you. So I'm going to put myself on mute now.
All right, the 5-minute timer is started. I'll give you some warnings as it goes down. Hey, Barna, you might want to leave up the question. Apparently my computer is being really messed up, but whatever. We're right at about a minute in now. Again, if you are just joining us, we are currently writing our thesis for the scenario that is up on the screen. So if you just want to join in and start typing, you can start type, read through it and start typing. We're about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes in, about halfway there.
If you're all struggling right now, just remember, don't stop believing.
Keep going.
No, that's all I had to say.
No, it's good. It's recorded. We'll review it in the video.
Hello, well, as Mr. Bognot says.
All right, you got about a little bit more than 1 minute left. A little bit more than 1 minute. About 30 seconds. All right, so that was about 5 minutes. So whatever you have on your chat little type screen, go ahead and submit that. That way we can see whatever you got. Even if it's absolutely terrible, it is going to help us as teachers understand kind of where you guys are at and kind of what we really need to work on. Just looking at the ones that I've seen thus far on the chat screen, not too bad as far as theses go. But I know I have a couple comments, different things like that can probably help out a little bit. So go ahead and submit whatever you got, and then we'll kind of go over it and kind of see what everybody has done.
We also recommend you not taking more than 5 minutes writing your thesis statement, because remember, you only have like 25 minutes to write the whole thing. So. Let me start reading some of them.
Well, I'm at your peers right now, so I can give a couple things on that one. If you want.
Oh, go ahead.
You want to alternate down or something like that? Yeah, let's just alternate down.
Sure.
All right. So Yakir said, free speech zones are necessary for the preservation of constitutional rights, and the First Amendment guarantees their existences even on college campuses. All right. So not a bad thesis. The only thing that I would critique about it is it's a little confusing as to which side of the argument you are going to be on. So a lot of the idea is that free speech zones are actually restricting the right to freedom of speech, not adding to it. So given that you can only have freedom of speech on certain areas on campus, would mean that is actually restricting your rights to speech. So I think you're on the right direction. It's just a little bit confusing in that way. But other than that, if you kind of reword it, it's in a good thesis setup. Just got to make sure that you're very, very clear as to what you are doing, whether you're for or against it.
All right, next up is Diego. Diego is, as the First Amendment allows the right to free speech, the use of free speech zones is unnecessary, as speeches made outside of the zones may be censored or otherwise blocked, which is unconstitutional. Okay, so here's my piece of advice for you. It's too much, right? You elaborated too much where you don't really need to elaborate. So if I were to revise your thesis, I'd just leave it at, the use of free speech zones is unnecessary as the First Amendment allows us, and then you go from there. Does that make sense, Diego? So you don't have to elaborate too much on your thesis statement. Remember, you elaborate when you cite the documents, you elaborate when you cite why that piece of evidence ties in with the thesis. So again, with thesis statements, it's just your statement. Like, I agree. And then later on, you elaborate. Okay? All right.
Yeah, also, I just want to add on to it, because I see it kind of happening a little bit. I would avoid using one of the foundational documents in your thesis statement, because in ideal, it's your opinion. It's your opinion based on just what you think, not necessarily what the First Amendment says. So I know that is probably the obvious foundational document that a lot of people want to throw in there. But as far as just writing your thesis, make it opinionated. Okay. I think the First Amendment is a perfectly good foundational document, but I think it would hinder your opinion about it just because you're saying, well, the First Amendment says that you have the freedom of speech. So just make it a little bit more opinionated as well. Well, I guess we can do like one more, something like that. Let's see. I'll do Paula's. Designating specific areas as allowing free speech while encouraging is an action that limits the rights as outlined in the First Amendment. Basically good. I have no problems. But instead of saying maybe like the First Amendment, just keep with that idea of what's your opinion about this situation, in that you could probably say, instead of saying is an action that limits the rights outlined in the First Amendment, you could just say your rights to speak wherever you want. Because again, we want to avoid using the piece of evidence until later, because then that way we have that usage for our evidence as we go through our actual essay.
Yeah, so like Paula, I would say designated specific areas as allowing free speech while encouraging is an action that limits the rights of citizens. There you go.
You want to do one more, Bagnat?
Yeah, sure. So let's take a look at Priyanka's. So the use of free speech zones on public college campuses creates a safe environment where the First Amendment can be practiced. Yeah, so again, ties in with what we've been saying. Don't cite any documents yet. What is your opinion? Yes, I agree with free speech zone as most basic form. Yes, So let's take a look. Develop an argument either for or against the use of free speech zones. So at its most basic form, yes, I am for free speech zones, or no, I am not for free speech zones. Simple as that. You have to start off with a very basic statement and then maybe add your little twist to it, but don't elaborate in your thesis statement.
Because your why is coming later. Your why is using the pieces of evidence and foundational documents that you have listed. So just be very simple, direct, to the point. That's good. All right, so on to the next setup. So Bogdan, can you switch back to the little format thing? So we did the thesis, we did the prompt, okay? So now what I want you to do is I want you to look for a piece of evidence, okay? We'll start with evidence number 1, and we'll say from the list, the two foundational documents that it gives you, you can either use the Declaration of Independence or you can use the First Amendment as your foundational documents to choose from. So what I want you to do is I want you to find one piece of evidence, and I want you to support your thesis with that piece of evidence, okay? And you can also just add your elaboration and reasoning onto it as well, because it'll get a little more confusing later on if we don't. So we're going to give you a little bit more time to complete that one. I would say since we used 5 for the thesis, we'll use about, let's say, 7 minutes, because I want there to be a little bit of time for you guys to read it as well. We'll say like 7 to 10 minutes to kind of get you going on your piece of evidence. Now, for this one in particular, just use what you've known. I don't want you necessarily like looking up your packets or anything like that. I guess you can use the internet since it's timed. It's kind of is also as well. But I would just base it on what you currently know. So anything that you know about the First Amendment, anything you know about the Declaration of Independence can be used as this piece of evidence. Also, just a thought, if you're planning on using the First Amendment, it's not all about freedom of speech. It's also a freedom of protesting as well. So just something to think about. All right. So I'll start the timer here. We'll say about 7 to 10 minutes. Okay. All right, here we go. And go.
Billington, check your phone.
Check my phone. I'm on my phone. What do you mean? Yeah, Diego, I just saw your question. It will actually, but your evidence will come later.
Just sent you a message, Billington.
Yeah. I'm trying to respond on my phone while it's tilted up. It's very hard. right at about 3 minutes. So we'll say it's almost about halfway there. So a little bit more than halfway, almost halfway there. Right at about 5 minutes. So we'll say about 3 more minutes left to kind of find a good piece of evidence and submit it onto chat. All right, we got about 30 more seconds. So we want to kind of try to finish up your piece of evidence and your elaboration or your support of your thesis with that piece of evidence. So we got about 30 more seconds. All right, so we'll go ahead and stop there. So whatever you got, just make sure you hit the enter button and you submit what you wrote onto the chat. I'll start reading through a couple of them, seeing what things we wrote, and then kind of critiquing, but also giving positives about what everybody wrote. Because so far what I've read looks pretty good. So go ahead and submit whatever you got, and then we'll go through them and kind of give our opinions on them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Diego, they are. Especially if you didn't. I think most of us here in chat have attended virtual review session number 1. That's on YouTube in its entirety. This one will be in its entirety too. All right. How many more seconds?
They're already submitted, so we're just waiting for maybe a couple more.
Okay. Do you want me to go over the first one?
Yeah, if you want to start.
Okay. So again, what we're looking for here, you already established your thesis. Again, it's just simply responding to the scenario of whether you're for or against. Okay. And you just simply put it at that. And now it's time for you to present your evidence and explain how it supports your thesis. So let's take a look at Diego's, since he's not here. Okay. So free speech zones are created to allow students. Okay, that's a typo. Free speech zones are created to allow students, or never mind, to allow students to protest, post signs, and engage freely in the expression of their opinions. Okay, inherently that is restriction of free speech. What the universities are essentially saying is you can only speak your mind at this designated area. The First Amendment allows for freedom of speech, freedom to peacefully assemble, religion, etc., as rights granted for all U.S. citizens, but nowhere does it say where or when these can be practiced. So if I go back to Diego's thesis statement, which is the First Amendment allows, okay, so he revised that. So let's say his new one is the use of free speech zones is unnecessary. And that can be like a pretty good thesis statement. The use of free speech zones are unnecessary. All right. So that's his thesis statement. And then he elaborated. He said, free speech zones are created because da 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 da. So then it says the universities are implying that they're restricting free speech, and that's not right. The First Amendment allows for freedom of speech, freedom to peaceful assembly, etc., as rights granted to all citizens, but nowhere does it say where or when these can practice. So evidence 1, did he use one of the docs from the list in the prompt to support his claim? Yes, he did. Did he explain what the First Amendment was? Yes, he did. And did he explain his reasoning on why he chose the First Amendment?
Hey, Bognar, can you put up the rubric instead of the set? Yeah, that'd be better. Yeah, there you go. You're good.
So did he use 2 pieces of evidence, or did he use 1 piece of evidence? So he would get those points. And did he elaborate on why the piece of evidence supports the claim? His thesis and claim and thesis used interchangeably. So his thesis was no, they're not effective, and here's why. So did he explain the why part? Did he elaborate? And he said yes. Technically, where it says inherently this is a restriction of free speech, I would say that would be a point, because he's citing the First Amendment and he's saying why this ties into it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, exactly. The couple things I read were really, really good. Showing the knowledge of that foundational document is always going to benefit you, that you know exactly what the foundational document is and you understand it. but then also relating it back to the actual prompt and the scenario is good. So yeah, that was I thought that was really good piece of evidence.
And to put it simply, so you have your thesis, which is a statement, and now you have to cite your first piece of evidence. All right. So your first piece of evidence is the First Amendment. The First Amendment is, and explain what that is, and then the second sentence should be, this is why it's important to this situation. Simple as that. So you can essentially write your first piece of evidence. So let's go back to this organizer here. You can write your evidence and reasoning. It could be 2 to 3 sentences. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be 4, 5, 6, 7 sentences. Just keep it short, sweet, to the point. Some of you are still kind of like putting extra details on there, but sometimes that's not necessary. Less is more.
Yeah, and also I think just to kind of show you kind of where it would break down as well, where it says like evidence 1, that's where I would show your knowledge of that particular foundational document. So when you're presenting your piece of evidence, show that you know what the foundational document or any piece of information that you're going to use as a piece of evidence actually means. So, and then when you go on beyond that to show the reasoning. So, for instance, like in Diego's response, he says that the First Amendment allows freedom of speech, freedom of to peacefully assemble, freedom of religion, etc. That's showing your knowledge of that particular piece of evidence. So that shows that, yes, I know what the First Amendment is. But then he goes on even to like elaborate his reasoning a little bit better and why that particular thing supports his claim. So yeah, that's kind of what you want to set it up as. One of the things that I actually wanted to point out, and this is not necessarily just like a critique per se, but I think Yakir's response actually brings up a super important part of this scenario that a lot of people may not be thinking about, in that his response says, the First Amendment lists freedom of to peacefully assemble and speech as being a right to every citizen. So boom, that's the piece of evidence, and he shows that he knows about that evidence by showing what it says. Then he says that there is no inclusion on where these rights are voided. Thus, the use of freedom of speech zones are unnecessary because the entire U.S. is a free speech zone. Citizens are also able to peacefully assemble anywhere. Okay, so a couple critiques. One of the things that I would say is it's a good setup, and it brings up a point that a lot of students probably will not write about, in that the actual area of where they could actually meet in this scenario. Is it correct? Do you guys, let's post it on the chat if anybody wants to respond. Do you guys think that you can actually basically assemble and protest anywhere in the country that you want? Just a quick yes or no probably would actually suffice. So go ahead, and I'll give you a couple seconds for that. Okay, yeah, so Yakir kind of caught himself there. So one of the things, and one of the important things about this particular scenario is that it is a public university. There are certain universities that are privatized, meaning that those actual rights are not guaranteed in that location. But if it is, for instance, like a state school, like UNLV or UNR, they have, that's kind of like the argument, because it is a semi-form of public schooling, the freedom of speech should be allowed anywhere on campus. So it definitely brings up a good point. You brought up a good point dealing with that. But yeah, other than that, you do a good job of kind of elaborating your piece of evidence into how the First Amendment is beneficial to this argument of that free speech zones are not necessary, and because you have the right to freedom of speech pretty much anywhere in the country. So yeah, good job there. Bharnath, do you want to do one more?
Yeah, I'll do one. So let's see. I'm just pulling up chat here. Alex Lenhart, the First Amendment states, is this a thesis or is this the response? Okay, never mind. The First Amendment states that every individual has protection towards the freedom of speech, religion, assembly, press, and the right to protest. So I'll get back to that statement. You made a little bit of a mistake there. This was created to be the first in the Bill of Rights to state its importance toward each American's rights. Creating a location to exercise these rights in theory may sound well, but it creates limitations of areas where these rights cannot be exercised, which the First Amendment states against. Okay, just a little minor tweak here. You said freedom of speech, religion, assembly, press, and protest. Protest and assembly. It's freedom of religion, assembly, petition, press, and speech. So you're missing the petition part. Petition against the government if they break the if they are doing stuff that's unconstitutional. You have the right to do that. So just replace protest with petition. That statement would earn you a point for using a specific document. Boom. This was created to be the first in the Bill of Rights to state its importance toward each of American rights, creating a location access. Okay, so the only thing that I have for you is how is it tying back to your prompt? How is it tying back to free speech zones? So try and make it specific to the prompt. The more specific you are to the prompt, the better. So in regards to free speech zones, like why is the First Amendment important? You say creating a location to exercise these rights in theory may sound well, but it creates limitations of areas where these. So you're heading in the right direction, but just make sure you include free speech zones there, just so it's you're earning the point for responding to the prompt. Does that make sense? But otherwise, it's pretty good.
Good. Yeah. Okay.
You didn't need the point where this was created to be the first in the Bill of Rights to state its importance towards each American's rights. I don't think that was necessary, because remember, less is more. You earned the point of the First Amendment by just that first sentence alone, and then the second sentence is not necessary, and then your third sentence is your tying back to the prompt to your thesis. So the second sentence you didn't really need to write. Remember, the more or the less is more because you're very limited on time.
Yeah, good. All right. So, so for the next part, Barna, can you switch back to the actual scenario page? We'll do that first, and then we'll kind of go into it later. All right. So then the second part of this is you have to find a piece of evidence from either another section of the First Amendment, which, based on the responses that we've given, I don't think you could possibly do that necessarily, based on your guys' responses, but you can absolutely use the Declaration of Independence or some other type of piece of evidence that you can from a different document or from some type of knowledge you gained from this course. So what I want you to do first is I want you to type in to your chat what document or piece of information you want to use as your piece of evidence. So you don't have to elaborate it yet. I just want to see where you guys are thinking you want to go with your second piece of evidence. So again, it does not have to be the Declaration of Independence. It can be, but I would probably find something else in a sense, or if you know a lot about the Declaration, you could probably use that as well. So I'll give you a couple minutes. Go ahead and type any other document or any piece of information that you can use as evidence in your second piece of evidence. Okay, so a couple minutes, and then we'll see what you got.
You can also include Supreme Court cases and
Also, you can use the internet. Remember, it's not necessarily cheating if they're allowing you to use it. It's open book, open note.
But you are super limited on time, so make sure you just know those foundational documents, a little bit about them in advance. How much more time do we have? All good Supreme Court cases. Okay, so yeah, Billington left. Are you there, Mr. Billington? Billy's. Can you hear him, or am I?
Yeah, we're good. Sorry, Mike was mic'd.
How much more time do we have?
We'll say like 1 more minute. All right, so let's go ahead and go over them. Bogdan, it looks like it actually deleted all the chat from mine because I don't know, it signed me out. So I don't have any of the responses on there, unfortunately.
Yeah. So were you requiring them to do the same thing with another piece of evidence, or just citing another?
Just other piece of evidence, just to kind of show the variety of different pieces of evidence. So
Yakir says First Amendment, which is technically right. You can use the First Amendment again. You can use Tinker versus Des Moines. Like, for example, if your thesis statement was, yes, we do need free speech zones because you don't necessarily have all the freedoms that you have everywhere, right? And you could mention like, oh, in the case of Hazelwood versus Kohlmeyer, time, place, and manner, you can't just write anything in the school newspaper and call it a day. And if your principal says, I don't want this, you can't, sue them, right? Because it's, again, time, place, and manner. So you can use that case. You can use Tinker versus Des Moines. So Tinker versus Des Moines would be a good case for, it all depends on how you phrase it, but Tinker versus Des Moines essentially allowed peaceful protest anywhere as long as it's not causing a disruption. So let's say if you're Yakir and Yakir said that they were necessary or weren't necessary. He said they weren't necessary. So he could say Tinker versus Des Moines. He can cite that and say, as long as it's peaceful, you can protest anywhere peacefully, right? So you can use Tinker versus Des Moines. All these cases like Grained versus City of Rockford, never heard of that. So don't confuse yourself. So don't just go to Google and search Supreme Court cases for First Amendment
speech.
Yeah. So you don't do that. Don't stress yourselves out. Now, if you use that one, Grained versus City of Rockford, now you have to read about it, and you're wasting time at that point. So keep it short, sweet, to the point. Shank versus. Go ahead.
I would use the list of the 15. So we posted that document out there with the Supreme Court cases. Do you have to fill that whole document out? No, but I would at least know what those 15 are about. That way you could Google it in the future. So for instance, like if you just knew that Tinker in Des Moines was about protesting, you can find out the details that you can write in your own essay once you get that particular thing, or if you want to like pre-do it, you can. But yeah, I would stick to the 15, like Bogdan said. Don't go outside that 15, because then it just makes it look like you Googled something that you probably didn't learn in class.
Yeah, Shank versus the United States is a good case. That's part of the 15. So it's essentially stating, oh, like this fella was telling people, hey, there's a draft, but avoid it. Like avoid the draft, avoid the draft, avoid the draft. And then there was an act at that time that prevented people from doing that, or you could go to jail. And so he went to jail and he protested saying, oh, my First Amendment rights were violated. No, they weren't, because they were in wartime, and there's a time, place, and manner for everything. That's the overall point of the First Amendment. Time, place, and manner. It all depends on what time it is, where the place is, and what the manner of which you're protesting is. So again, all good responses. Okay. First Amendment, good. Declaration of Independence, good. Any other document, Supreme Court case, that's good. All right. So I'm just going to go back to this graph. We're going to wrap it up after. So I'm just going to say one more thing, and then Billington will wrap it up. Okay. Yeah. So again, we're going to give you something similar to this. It's very, very simple. So you just, restate the topic. You then provide your claim or thesis. Again, it's just one sentence and you don't have to elaborate. Okay. So you just write yes or no. Yes, because, no, because. So are free speech zones necessary? Yes, they are necessary because, wait. I take the whole statement back.
Yes, free speech zones.
Free speech zones are necessary in order to blank. Free speech zones aren't necessary because blank, but keep it short, sweet, to the point. Then you elaborate when it comes down to providing your evidence, citing your evidence. So evidence one, the First Amendment states blah, 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 blah.
You have the right to freedom of speech.
You have the right to freedom of speech. So you can say,
and by using these freedom of speech zones, it restricts your right to freedom of speech.
Exactly. And then you go to evidence two, and then you provide your reasoning for that. And then you can sum it all up in like one sentence as to why you were right based on the evidence that you have provided. So it's very simple.
Yeah. And again, they're not looking for these in-depth explanations of these different things because you just don't have the time to do that. So just as direct and quick to the point as possible would be ideal. But again, if you feel like you need to explain things, explain them, because if it doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to make sense to anybody that's reading it. So make sure you are explaining it to make sure it's understood correctly. All right, we good? We're gonna close it out.
I think we're gonna close it out. Yeah. So again, my piece of advice: go over those foundational packets that we're about to post. I'll post all of them on Google Classroom. Also, take a look at those packets for each unit, so you have a general understanding of each unit and what the important points are. And if you weren't here for the first review session, we dissected question 2, which is concept analysis in that video. This video, as a recap, we dissected question 1. Our next review session will be next Friday at 12 p.m. We will go over
next week.
Next week. Next week, not tomorrow, Friday. So Friday, May 1st, 12 p.m. to 1. We're going to review some Unit 1 key points, and we're going to actually do a practice question 2 FRQ. We'll just give it to you. We'll time you for 15 minutes, which is the same exact time you would have on the AP exam itself. And then we'll see what you had responded with. We're going to do it on Google Forms, and we're going to show your responses on screen, so it's easier for you to follow. Okay, everybody, I hope you're well. And at this point in time, I'm going to stop the recording.
Wait, don't do it yet. Make sure, I don't know, Margot, did you post your attendance check this week already? I'm pretty sure you did.
But, yeah, I do. I post mine on Mondays, so make sure you mark them as red.
Yeah, just double check, make sure you mark is done on those, because I'm going to be entering attendance tomorrow for my class, and Bogna probably already entered his in. But yeah, good job, guys, today. We look forward to seeing you in the future in the next couple before the test. Thanks, guys.